Hello and good evening. I'm Mario the Artisan Rogue. Tonight I'm going to be working on another addition to a series of artwork that I've been doing and creating for Brass Engine Games or Brass Engine Productions. Actually, I'm not sure. I think it's just Brass Engine Games. It's my buddy Ben's company, and he and I have worked in tandem on a few other projects in the past, and it's always been a lot of fun. Some games, and more recently this really cool series of slate coasters that he's been utilizing a glowforge to etch into, and I'll show you an example of that, kind of a mock-up of what one looks like later. But for right now, the one that I'm going to start on tonight is this fighter design. Now if we go ahead and take a look at the outline here, this is an outlined vector. I designed some typefaces and stuff and put them together to create this this logo, for lack of a better term, that's going to go here into this layout. Now, so the idea for this is I'm trying to create something that is a square in dimension, just like the document here in Illustrator is, layout that can be etched into a coaster. So what I normally do with these things, on most of the designs so far, I've done little corner pieces or done different sorts of backgrounds and iconography. The goal for these was to not have them be character based, as in like a specific character personality showing up in there, like a human, an orc, and a troll, whatever. And so with something like this, what I'd normally do starting off is I'll go ahead and lock down this first layer, and then I kind of decide, okay, so it's a fighter. So I've been hand drawing a lot of this stuff out, which is everything you're about to see is probably completely wrong for how most people should be creating this stuff. But this is how I work in Illustrator. Here's where things are a little bit bizarre. I'm designing in reverse to what the end product will look like. So, in other words, everything you're seeing that is black is going to be what will be etched into the design. I invert that process whenever I take it into Photoshop, which I'll show you at the end of this, how this whole thing goes. So wish me some luck. I'm just going to jump into this. So the first thing I'm going to do is clear out that and go ahead and make my fill black, because what I want this next part to be, and I end up making tons of decisions as I go along, with what something's going to look like. Now the corners, I'm thinking, okay, I want something that has, maybe a sort of stone work sort of feel to it. So I'm not worried about strokes or anything else like this at this point. I'm just trying to create something that looks like it would be maybe part of a fighter's pit or something. And so I'm just coming in here, and maybe this has a little bit of a rock strata feel to it. Now to go in, if I do this, it's going to fill it in completely this way, and this is just going to be how it's going to look. I don't really like the fact that, this isn't lining up right there in the corner very well. So what I will probably end up doing, I end up doing a lot of deleting and adding back in for a lot of reasons. So something I've done before is to kind of give myself a little bit, pardon me while I back up, my keyboard is actually way lower. So I'm just going to put in a rounded shape here for design's sake. And then I'm going to go back over on top of this with another shape. So this will be kind of the base shape of what this corner brick might look like. And I promise everything I'm talking about will hopefully make sense here as soon as I can show you guys what my goal was in doing this. And I'm hoping this is really going to come out kind of cool. If not, then, nobody ever has to see this video. And that's okay. Make this crack kind of run up in there a little bit. Come back out. Now you'll notice I'm not completing it that way. I'm actually coming over this way. Come all the way around over here. This is in no way, shape, or form meant to be a tutorial. Not even remotely. I'm going to make the overarching color on that red. The reason for that is so I can see that the discerning factor of where the red subtracting shape is over the black. And what I mean by that is I'm going to go over here into my Pathfinder area. And there's an option right here that's minus front. And so now I've got this shape that I can build upon. It's a little bit more closer to what I wanted. If I hold it up to this true corner, you can kind of see where it fits. It has really nothing to do with the document corner, but it allows me to build upon that. So now what I'm going to do Let's go in here. I'm going to add some other stuff in here. Like maybe I want to put... The only annoying thing I found is when I work with a pen, maybe somebody else that knows more about Illustrator can kind of fill me in on this. I always struggle to keep the color that I want in there. I select it and it defaults back to this. So what I'm doing now is I'm kind of drawing in random details that I feel kind of evoke, you know, something violent and you know, kind of fighterish, kind of brutish, you know. So got some claws there. Maybe over here I've got some really rough spikes coming off this thing here. Put one there. Put another one. No, that jack that up. Put another one down here like this. Close that up. Okay. Now, if we go ahead and do wireframe, you can see the original shape here. Just like this is made up of a bunch of small vector points. You can see where this is all together here. And I tend to like this. This is looking pretty cool, but I want to add some other details in here. So the way I'm building details on top of this is to cut shapes out of that. Anything that's in white will stay the darker color of the slate. So the slate is kind of a darker gray rock color. And then when this burns into it, it kind of does this wild whitish tan chalk sort of color. It's really cool. I think you guys will like it. Even the mock-up that I'm going to show you at the end isn't really as cool as it can look. So now I'm going to come back in here. Maybe I want, you know what? Maybe I want a sort of chain sort of thing on here. So what I'm going to do is first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to merge these. So you'll notice here, you know, these are all they're all separate pieces at this point, right? And now if you group them, if you're working in Illustrator, you can group them together, and now they move together. You can't separate them out unless you ungroup the whole thing. But what you can also do is after you've grouped them, I always come in here and I merge them. You notice all those little shapes went away. I'll undo real quick. Those shapes went away. I'll show you in the wireframe. Okay, there's the intersecting areas. This is for anybody who doesn't work in Illustrator, okay? You can select the whole thing again. And we're looking at this in wireframe mode. I hit the same thing, which is unite, and it's creating a compound path of everything together. So now this is just a unified shape. And there's a reason why I did this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock this, which is Control 2 on your keyboard. So the next thing I'm going to do is come in here. Now I want this kind of other rounded shape here, but I'm going to switch this over to a white. And here's why I'm doing that. Actually, I want that to be the full body. So coming in here, I hold Shift. Do that. And then I'm going to shrink this back down just a bit. Now what this is it's going to be like a little bit of rock, you know, like a little bit of a rock detail coming out of it. I have no idea if this is really going to work, but this is what I'm going to try. Okay. So I'm going to set this here like this, and then taking a look at it now, I'm like, okay, do I want that? No, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to invert this, and I'm going to increase the stroke so it's a little bit bigger. About 3 point. I try not to go any smaller than 3 point on detail because of what the glowforge does. It's a laser, and it can get some really cool detail in there, but I know that it can become jumbled and look kind of messy after a while, and because of the substrate that it'll be cutting into and burning into, it depends on what you're working on. Leather, it looks like it's far more refined. The rock has differentiating texture to the top of it. It's not a smooth plane, so that can probably create some difficulties. I don't know. I don't specifically work with the glowforge. That's Ben's thing. So I'm going to go in here into the object, and I'm going to go ahead and hit expand, which I want to go ahead and expand the fill and the stroke, which creates that vector shape. If we go into wireframe, you can see there what was the stroke, the 3 point stroke, has now manifested as a geometric shape. I don't think it's called a Boolean object. I'm not really sure what that's called. All right, now for the center of it, I'm going to go in here and put in a round circle. This one, no, I don't want that. I want this rounded square again. that. Okay. Now, here's where things are going to get a little bizarre. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to build sort of this kind of chain door knocker sort of look to it. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull this off, like a big heavy ring hanging off of it down here. There's a reason why I'm building this way, because I found that this has been easier for me to be able to look at this and get a concept of what I'm trying to put together on here. So I want to have it to where, you know, it looks like kind of a thick ring holding it. And then this other one here. So I'm going to go up to this one. I'm going to hit expand. Now the reason I didn't have to expand the previous, this little tic-tac shaped one here, is because that was already a shape. It didn't have a stroke on it or anything else like that. So now here's where I kind of like, if I were to do this, the white would knock out and it would stand up on itself. But I want some differentiation between the different components on here. So what I'm going to do is, like for this circle, I'm going to go ahead and hit copy and then place a copy directly behind it. And then I'm going to go ahead and select the stroke. I'm going to come over here and put about a, let's see here, another 3-point stroke. I'm going to round the corners on that just for safety. And we're also going to make the center one black. Now, in case you're wondering what I did, I basically took a copy of that white circle and dropped it behind it and made it completely black. Black for the fill and then black for the outer stroke of it. It was naturally larger because it's a 3-point circle that became a whole object, was copied behind itself, and then the stroke grew out from there. Now I do that on purpose for a reason. After I do that, I'm going to go up here to object and I'm going to expand that one. You'll see that it does a multiple expand there, and I'm going to completely put it together. Then what I do is, if I can pull this off right, those two I'm going to group together now, okay? So now you'll see that when this will cut into the slate substrate, where the black line is will be the burned in area, and the white area will be the raised area. And again, a lot of this is going to make way more sense once I'm finished with this. So then the next thing I want to do is I'm going to bring this and I'm going to cut that and place it directly in the front. Now I could leave it like that and that looks okay, but I'm going to do the same thing I did prior. Copy, place a copy right behind it, and then I'm going to change its fill color to black. You can't see that because it's directly behind the white tic-tac shape. And then I'm going to go ahead and fill that stroke also to 3 points. Round that out. And you can see it kind of there a little bit. If we were to zoom in, you could see it a little bit better, so I'll do that. Okay. And then once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and select those two. No, actually, what I'm going to do, sorry, I messed up. Now I have to lock down this white shape. And you'll notice if I select it, it shows like, it looks like it's selecting the same white shape. But again, for anyone familiar with this, I'm selecting the shape behind it, which has a black fill, and then this 3-point black stroke around it. I'm going to go ahead and go to Object, expand that one. There you'll see that overlapping. I'm going to unite it to make just a singular black, larger tic-tac around it like that. And this was the look I was going for. So it looks like there's this holding piece that's kind of coming out, and then the circular ring sits within it, and then it's got like another little bordered thing around it. Now, this looks fine, but it looks very geometric for what it's sitting on. So now what I'm going to do is add a little bit of, this is where you can, for me, it turns into, you know, quite a bit of fun for this, because like what I'll do is I'll lock everything down. So that's Control 2. And then I end up coming back in here with my pen tool, selecting the black. I want to be able to give it a bit of a highlight or something like that. So and this is where I had to end up thinking in reverse. The very first few designs I did, I wasn't thinking about that. And there's a lot of them I want to revisit now. But since this thing is sticking out a little bit, I want to put a little bit of a highlight on here and kind of make it look roughed up. And that highlight is going to be in black because of the fact that this will be burned into the shape. So it'll be black like that. And then maybe maybe the ring has a little bit of detail here. Well, first let me do this out here. So this part out here, maybe there's a small crack going into it over here. Come back out. Because this is a vector, I can conjoin multiple sections together. I'll make this crack go all the way across, come back out. Bring one in this way, come back out this way. And then, now this I don't have to conjoin it with anything. It can just live on its own on top, and I've got a little bit of weathering now on the shape. Then here on this, I'm going to put a little bit of a highlight here. This is where it definitely pays to zoom in on this. And I know there are a ton of people like, why aren't you using the pen tool? Because I don't like the pen tool. I have never liked the pen tool. I kind of like this odd sort of texture, weirdness, kind of jittery hand thing that I get going on with the detail with the pen tool. For me, it's just a little bit more illustrative. And of course, I'm not going to leave that untouched down here. So I'm going to come in here. Maybe this one broke through there as well too. I see a little bit of rock there. So this is sort of an aged rock face or edge to that. And now all that I'm cutting out is way on the very top. It's all sitting on layer 3 over here, as you'll notice. But it's just sections and sections and sections of vector elements placed on top of each other to create this. And then, so, let me see here. Maybe I'll put a small bit of, contouring down here. There we go. That's all I really need. I don't like mirroring it completely. Okay, now since this chunky thing behind it is done similarly, I will go in here now with white. Now, anything that's white is, again, going to pop up. So maybe this has, since this is a little bit of a rock facing on here, place something like this in here. And really, this is probably the most fun thing for me. So I've gotten this obsession recently. I am the proud owner of a megalodon tooth. For those of you that don't know what that is, it is an ancient shark, about 60 feet long, huge, made the great white look like a tadpole. And when I got the tooth, I've been using it as a reference point for anything and everything I have to draw. If it has a claw-like consistency to it, I've been running over and looking at the tooth. It's actually sitting over here on this part of the studio. So with something like this, I'm looking at this and going, okay, so I don't want to overwhelm this, because this whole black area is going to get burned into it. So I just want enough to evoke that this is kind of a rocky outcropping or something along that line. So maybe there's just some finer details kind of evoking brickwork here. So I'm not going to go too nuts with it. Just go like this. Put a white shape there. And just enough that, you kind of get the feeling that there's something more to this. Because there's been some that have worked out that I've designed that I was like, oh, no, this worked out really good, where, you can see that, oh, okay, cool, this is a flat shape, and it's just meant to be a design element of a sword or a lance or something like that. And then there have been some other things where I was like, this is kind of a big blobby thing, and there's not a lot of detail in here. So, and I don't have to be the most accurate person when it comes to this. This is one of the reasons why drawing like this in Illustrator really makes me happy. Now in this one, I'm going to break the boundary down here a little bit and start off, so that way I've got some brickwork that's a little bigger. I'm going to try and follow and give a little bit of connection to those outer shapes. Not a whole lot. I don't want there to be a specific connection point all the way for all of them. I want it to look a little bit downtrodden and rotted out. Oh, not black. I want white. Okay, so there's that. Now, I'm not going to merge these shapes because there's black and white vectors all throughout the whole thing. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom out. I'm actually really digging how that looks. I'm going to go ahead and highlight all of this. Since this is all on layer 3, I'm going to go ahead and hit Control G. And that merged what was there. And I realized I just made a mistake because I used, if you remember, Control 2. So I had locked down the majority of the black stuff that was underneath. So now I can actually go back in here, select everything, hit group, and that is now one big merged shape. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hit copy and front. And then I'm going to go here and I'm going to go to transform and reflect, hit preview. And the vertical flip is just doing that. And then I used to drive people at work nuts doing this. I just use the mouse while I talk, and because I'm still technically doing work, aren't I? I have to have some humor because the last few days have just been really insane. And if you haven't been living under a rock, that old chestnut of a saying, then you know that things have been really jacked up in this country. And it's been really painful to watch the news and try and stay in a good mood. It's really not been fun. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take both of these, and since I've been copying basically the same corners on most of my designs and then varying them to a certain degree, I'm going to go ahead and copy. Well, first I'm going to group these. So those are now grouped. I'm using Control G again. I always group it a couple times. And I'm going to hit copy, and then I'm going to do Control F for putting it directly in front again. And I'm going to go back up to Object, Transform, Reflect. Instead of vertical, I'm going to go horizontal with the preview option there. And I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to do the same thing again. Doop-a-doo. Doop-a-doo. As I go up. Now, as soon as I get up there, there is one thing I probably should have changed, but it's not a really big deal. I'll get to it here in a moment. Let's see here. 22 minutes in. This takes me a little while longer than I thought it was going to be designing this stuff. You know, that looks okay. You know, I got my stroke thing here in the way. Oh God, I need my strokes. All right. That sounded really weird to say. All right, so this looks okay. I have a little bit of a problem with the fact that there's, you know, these the rings that would normally be holding chains are hanging up there. And originally my idea had been to go ahead and go all out and kind of connect it with a chain in between, you know, so then there's chains holding each one and stuff. More I thought about that, I was like, I'm going to end up crowding this. The goal for these were to really highlight the typography in these things, like I said. So I'm probably going to enlarge Fighter a little bit more, get it out here, kind of middle balance between the teeth. You guys can't actually tell where the hell my hands are going on here. I keep thinking it's like my other setup over here where it's an overhead camera and you guys can see my hands. That would be trippy, wouldn't it, for me to have an inset where you can see my hands also doing this? I have yet to set that up. I have a secondary camera over here, this one, and it's a lower res camera. This one's actually going to be for another set of projects I have where I'm going to be, that's the hope for Twitch, and if not that, for YouTube Live, where I'll be live drawing. But I have these storyteller dice that I'm going to be rolling, and then that's going to tell me what to draw. I'm kind of freaked out about that, but I'm also looking forward to it. What I'm really going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hit save, since I haven't saved anything on here. And that would just totally devastate me at this point if everything just stopped working. So technically what I should have done was only copied some of these parts, but you'll understand why I'm doing this here in just a second. So now I'm going to go in here, and because it's not a real big deal, I'm going to try and ungroup and see, like, all right, so everything here is still really heavily grouped. So I'm going to ungroup, ungroup. Okay, that's all the grouping I did. Now what I'm trying to do is just pick out these elements in here. The easiest way for me to do this first would be to select everything but those elements, and I'm going to lock that down. Lock those down. Lock that down. And lock that down. Reason I did that was so that when I go back over, all I'm selecting are those dangling shackles. Then I'm going to go back up here to Object. I'm going to hit Arrange. No, not Arrange. Transform. I'm going to reflect them. And the default is automatically what the last thing was I did, which is perfect for this. I'm going to hit OK. Now with these, since I don't want them so high up, I'm just going to go ahead and pull them down a little bit, which is fine. And one of the reasons I outline in black so much is because as I bring this down, I'm not going to bring it down all the way. Yeah, about right there is fine. So they're kind of level with where the other ones are. You'll notice down here, like, there's a little bit of the, about that much distance up there. I'm just eyeballing it, honestly. But you'll notice it's not a big deal. But since this isn't just a purely visual illustration, this is going to be something burned into a substrate, there's a reason why I went ahead and put... now you just really want to zoom in slow. There's a reason why there's this whole extra line here and why I try and outline in black on everything, because I'm very cognizant of the fact that there will be shapes that may just suddenly kind of disappear, because remember, white is what's going to be the darker color of the slate piece. Conversely, if this was being burned into wood, or this was being burned into anything else, it, like leather, like a lot of the different stuff that Brass Engine carries, anything that it would burn would normally turn dark, and that's fine. In this case, anything it burns is turning light. I'm going to do something most people don't do. I know I'm picking on people now, but I'm going to go ahead and name my layers. That's an amazing thing, isn't it? I call these corner elements. Then I'm going to hit save. That is a huge pet peeve of mine. I cannot stand when I get, and I do a lot of freelance where I get older files from people and nothing's named, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm looking at here. So another thing I tend to do, although, I think sometimes I think I'm kind of crazy on this, is if I'm done with an element, or something like that, sometimes I'll go in, I'm actually thinking of the wrong program. If I'm working in layers in Photoshop, I'll go in and I'll actually color code all of the layers, certain things. The green ones are the layers I'm completely done with. The red ones are elements I don't want to print or I have to get rid of. And then the yellow ones are the ones in progress. And I kind of use that whole stoplight bit for anything I'm creating. So now I'm going to go up here and I'm going to unlock layer 1. And in case you're wondering, no, there is no reason why it's layer 1 and then was layer 3 and then layer 2. I rename everything, so everything you add is just the next numerical layer that pops in. That's all there is to it. I'm going to lock off layer 2 for no reason, just out of habit. Now in this one, I'm holding shift while I'm grabbing the middle, which is going to make this kind of come out at the same time. And again, like all my designs, I know this is probably going to drive a lot of people crazy. This is technically a 4x8. So I'm going to drag out a guide and put it on the 4. I would normally, if I was a good designer, line this up right here, and it would be pretty centered. But I also have to judge if this is going to look right. Like the F is leaning in a little bit more, or is leaning in a certain way, but the R is really leaning in, just from how I kind of designed it. The natural center of this would be the H. Not visually, I understand that because of the width of certain letters and how things went, and I capitalized the F at the beginning for a stylistic choice. If I were to align this in the middle of the H, which is where I've actually seen a lot of people do really messed up things, you'll notice how much this is off. It doesn't show up so big, it's not that big of a difference on some things I've seen printed, like, when people do display fonts on letterheads and stuff. But in this case, this is integrally part of the design. So in this one, I am going to stick to the adherence of, here it is in the middle, and it really works. There's a part of me that really wants to push it over just a little bit, but then I start to see like how much more off it looks to me, and I'm like, all right, fine. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Now this is not going to be the, and then the next thing I do is I also go in, I clear out my guides. I hate guides. I hate them. I get rid of them. I turn them off. I just can't stand them. So I'm going to lock that for now. And actually, I'm going to hide the fighter layer. And then I'm left with here is the corner elements. I'm going to move the corner elements down to the bottom just because. And you also have to be careful. When you're working in Illustrator, you can accidentally jumble your layers. I've done this so many times where all of a sudden layer 2 has all these broken up elements of another layer that I moved and I wasn't paying attention. So just a word to the wise to watch what you're doing there. So this one I'm also going to rename. That one is going to be typography. I'm not talking very well tonight because I'm very tired. Had the show earlier with Phil, And normally by that time I'm pretty well spent. And it was between, you know what, I really feel bad because I hadn't been doing any art, and I really wanted to record something tonight. And I figured, okay, I can maybe get an hour one done that will be pretty quick. I can edit and I can slap up on my YouTube channel. I've really got to start getting more content back up on there. I just hadn't felt like it, guys. Honestly, that was the biggest problem. So typography, and this one was Theta. Okay, that's what that one's named. All right, so I am going to quickly look at a note here because I have a PDF that was sent to me. I'm familiar with most of these. These are all based on Dungeons and Dragons classes. I think like whatever edition they're on now, 7th edition, 5th edition, 6th. I'm embarrassed that I don't know this. But so I was kindly given prompts by Ben on what they were. For the fighter, he very much had martial combat, multitudes of weaponry, sword, axe, shield. So I'm going to go ahead and focus in on that and go, all right, at its most easy base for the iconic look of this, I want to go ahead and, you know, go with a sword, an axe, and a shield. So when I think fighter, you know, I think gladiatorial, I think something along that line. So here's where I can kind of have some fun. Hopefully we can get this done here in 30 minutes. If not, then I'll still show you what I've got, and then we can go from there. So I kind of build things in a wild way here. So what I do is I'm leaving this in here, but I'm going to turn this off for now, just so I've got a clean slate to work from. I'm going to go ahead and save it. Build what basically a gladiatorial sword, or, you know, what I would picture a fighter using or something. And I kind of picture it as maybe like, you know, big, heavy, broad-bladed weapon. It goes back a certain way, maybe, you know, brutish blade. So the first thing I'm really concerned with is like, how brutal can this blade look, right? And that's looking pretty good, but I also don't like flat-edged blades. I am really not a fan of that. So let's go ahead and we're going to copy, paste directly in the front. We're going to go ahead and hit transform, and we're going to do reflect. We're going to do vertical. And then we're going to move this over like this. Okay. And, yeah, this is looking pretty good. Looking like a gladius. That's an old Roman sword. Oh my God, the other day. Okay, so I'm one of those kind of guys that I pride myself on trying to find out the pronunciation of things and try to use terminology fairly accurately if I can. Everybody makes mistakes. I am certainly no exception to that. I only realized today that the term that's spelled S-A-L-V-E, I've been calling it salve all my life, and it's salve. I didn't know the L was silent. I was corrected by a few people live today, and I was like, oh my God, that's embarrassing. All right, so I'm going to bring this down, and then what I'm going to do is select these and bring the blade up a little bit more. So that way, you know, because what I'm going to do is kind of the classic crossing of the elements and then a big old round sword or shield in the center. And I'm designing everything in here because the idea is that everything that I'm designing is going to be the highlights, and then I'm going to go back in and add some shadowing. All right, so we're going to bring this down here. Now, I'm thinking, okay, what kind of brutal sort of handle would I want on this thing? So the hilt, or the crossguard. Let's start with the crossguard. So if it's going to be kind of a heavier brutish sword, maybe it's got a sweeping bit that comes in like this. Now, understand, I don't know everything there is about swords. I really wish I knew far more than I do. I did spend some time around a lot of medieval reenactors and the SCA and historical reenactors, and I picked up quite a bit of information along the way, and it was a lot of fun. That's a little too blocky, but see, normally I get mad at myself because I'm like trying to create something where I'm like, well, I need something to look kind of nice and swordy. And is that even a word? Nice and swordy. All right. So close it like that. Okay, well, that's actually not looking too bad. And I like these weird, like, since this is sort of a fantasy element, I mean, it's weird because a lot of times you'll see these really fantastical swords that are really nothing more than these weird looking wall hangers, and they're just like the weirdest thing to me. Because, you know, you can look at real history, you can see some pretty crazy and fantastical looking hilts and pommels and blades and swords, every element of the sword. There were some that were used for parades, and there were some that were just ceremonial, and some that were just amazing oddities. And there were people, I mean, more swords have been lost to antiquity and the tests of time than anything else. I mean, we really don't know to what extent. I mean, you see the customization that people do with knives and guns today. It was probably way more of that at that point in time. So now we've got this, and that's certainly not the size the hilt is going to stay. But I'm going to finish building a couple of elements to it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shrink this down. I'm going to hold down shift while I'm shrinking it down so it's kind of staying in proportion. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy it. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. Pasted the wrong thing. I didn't copy it. I pasted the last one. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing here. Transform that. That it was already on vertical. And then I'm going to move this over. So this one, I'm going to give it a little bit of space in between. I'm not too concerned about them merging up like this. I mean, they could. I'm not too concerned. I want it to be a little wider because right here where the cross guard is, I'm going to build another element. And I'm going to come in here. Yeah, that should be good. And I wasn't too worried about the overall shape. I just wanted this to look really good. Okay, so the way that I'm working on this is actually how I do most of my illustrations. I don't ever really have plans when I'm designing my robots. It's kind of all off the top of my head when I'm doing stuff like this. And I really enjoy doing things like this because this is the closest I get to freehand drawing that I can record, and I really enjoy that. All right, so there's the crossguard. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and merge all that. It kind of looks like a ship. In a normal circumstance, I'd be saving a lot of these elements over to the side to use for robots, and that's actually what I do on some days. If I'm feeling bored, I'll just design really interesting mechanical parts. Like, oh, here's a mechanical heart, here's a mechanical rib cage, here's a robotic or droid-like hand, and then I save them kind of like shadow puppet elements and then build robots from that. I haven't done that in months, but I used to do it quite a bit. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and drop this on here, kind of get it in the center, and we'll shrink this down just a bit. Still want enough of the crossguard to show, so that's good. Let's see here. Bring that out that way. All right, so there's that. That's looking together really good there. All right, I'm digging that. I'm really liking that. Now, I'm not going to merge this yet. I'm going to try to remember to keep all this kind of separate here. And we may run out of time before I have a chance to show it to you. But I will show you the finished one when it's all done. Let's see. We'll see how long this video goes. I don't want to bore you guys with this. Hopefully I'm not. So now it's just kind of building some shapes on top that I can merge and add to it. Oh, see, like that one? This is where it pays for me to zoom in. I try to stay back so I can really kind of enjoy the shapes that I end up creating and deciding, okay, am I going to merge this with this or what? Notice I'm not merging with the blade. That's the new one there. So now I want a handle. So we'll make this one maybe a 1.5 hand sword as opposed to a 2-handed. And I'm not purposefully trying to keep it very taut and straight. I'm just kind of having fun with it at this point because I'm like, I always go back and forth with this sort of thing, and I have to zoom out, look at it, and go, okay, does that bring it down here on this? Like, does the handle look too long? Yes, it does. Is it too straight? Yeah, it is, So what I'll end up doing is just, and a lot of this is so much guesswork. I go, okay, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, it's too much. 2. And back here, 1, 2. All right, so that's slimmed down the blade, or the handle, but it's still too long. Bring it down just a bit. So it's just around the size of about 1.5 hands. Now I want to design the pommel. Pommels are always really fun. My favorite pommel in fantasy is the one that's used for not Glamdring. That's Gandalf's sword. You Tolkien fans are going to totally kill me on this. Strider sword in the movies. Has this gorgeous hollow pommel. And they talk about this in the appendices with how hard it was to actually create that and keep the blade balanced. And they did an amazing job. I'm still always blown away by how Viggo Mortensen literally became, according to Bob Anderson, the great Bob Anderson, he became an amazing swordsman. And that to me is certainly high praise from a man that I admired as a swordsman and stuntman growing up. He had parts in The Princess Bride, things like that. Just amazing stuff. All right, so this one, maybe this one is a bit more brutish in how it's designed. I'm almost refining this a little bit too much. I'm getting stuck in thinking of Lord of the Rings blades. So maybe the pommel is a bit more of a, and it's a fighter. So maybe this one has, you know what? Let me go ahead and do that now. Let me kind of rough this up a bit. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do something I don't always do. I'm going to merge some of these components. And I'm going to come in here. And maybe the handle is down here. Maybe there's some fabric wrapped up around it. And fabric is one of my favorite freaking things to illustrate. It adds so much more to this when you see this additional texture, even especially like in silhouette. There's just something about these things. You get this very geometric shape, and then all of a sudden you get something like that, and you can just feel that there's this like this leather or this rough, fabric wrapped around it. So now maybe the pommel, how would I do this? You know what? Maybe the pommel is, maybe it really is just a simple, very, because I've refined so much more of the blade and kept it so nice looking. A fighter could still have a very nice pommel of sorts on here, but it still needs to be somewhat, oh man, so maybe something like this could work. Drop it here, put it there. So there, it's more of a jagged claw, but it's not like a really rough claw. So maybe something like that. Oh, I'm digging that. I'm really digging that. Yeah, I like that a lot. Oh, you know what I'm going to do though? All right, so we were talking about Aragorn's sword earlier. I'm going to go ahead and do a small cutout section in here like that, which will look kind of cool here in just a second. So now I'm going to come up here and I'm going to use not intersect but minus front, and that's going to cut a hole in it. So now I'm going to merge all of that. Okay, so now we're zooming back out. Now there's the finished sword. Now if I were to select everything and move it out here temporarily, I'm just going to put it out here on the gray for a second. You can see that the area I knocked out on there is now transparent, but everything else is still solid. So now, before I get carried away, I'm going to decide, okay, which way do I want this to look? Now, I'm not going to complete the sword completely right now. I will put the highlights in there once I decide what the axe looks like and which one's going to look better on which side of the shield, since I still have to design the shield. So what I'm going to do now, let's go ahead and I'm just grouping this like crazy, okay? Set my, whoa, look what I did there. I tapped too many times and I activated the sublayers. That's what I was talking about. The sublayers are nothing to mess with here. So let me make sure I have everything. All right, there. There is something about using this pen in Illustrator that for some reason it really decides, no, that's not what you want. You want this instead. So the shield is going to be under the same premise. I'm going to stick with a basic shield shape, just a round one. And this one will have a little bit more, we'll maybe go about that big or so, something like that. Now, I found that when I'm trying to design the shields, I'm going to build them in concentric circles, and then I'll go back in and fill the fields in as I go along. I'm going to keep copying, and so this one will have a natural field of white, so that way as I'm building the circles on top of each other, I'll know if I mess up by putting something in the wrong order because I won't be able to see that one that I was working on. Let's copy, put it in front, and I'm going to go ahead and bring this down just a bit. Okay. So copy in front, and I'm going to come down here and create a shield boss for it. Now I'm going to go ahead and go to the Y, which is the outline, and you'll notice there's a little cross section in there, and I will work in this for a while. I know there's a way to make this to where it stays centered, but I am that kind of guy that will just recenter and recenter by hand like crazy because I like to do that. Okay, nope. I'm going to just click off of that. All right. So there's the basic build of the shield. I'm going to go back in here, and I'm going to give everyone the same weight on that, simply for reference point. It isn't anything more than that, but it helps me from forgetting about anything being in there. Now, copy front. And sometimes I do this whole, like, instead of moving it with the mouse, because I've messed up even that before, I'll kind of slowly build elements. And then as I'm copying and pasting them in front of each other, this is a good way for me to check to see if I'm staying centered or any of these things. And there we go. All right, so there's those elements of that one. I will probably end up doing some sort of fiber wrap or something around the edge of the shield, but that's looking pretty good for now. Okay, so now let's make some decisions. If I want the shield to show up, I have to remember that fighter is going to show up in front of it. So what is going to make the most amount of sense? At some point, I will probably have to drop a white outline around this so that wherever areas that would be black on black would bisect, fighter will still pop forward. And I'll do that here in a minute. In fact, you know what? Let me go ahead and do that now. I'm going to lock down the shield since I sort of know this is where the shield is going to go. I have a general idea the shield is going to be the main element. Then I'm going to go in here and let me lock down, not the corners. Oh, well, that's looking pretty cool, isn't it? But see, now I got to remember, okay, I've only got so much area for that, so the shield is actually going to be a little bit smaller so I can show off the weaponry. It's things like that. That's where I start checking myself on a lot of stuff. So I'm glad I did activate that. All right, so let's go here. So now, here's where I can take a little bit of liberty with this. I'm going to go ahead and copy the whole thing and paste it in the back. And now, you'll notice that there's a question mark. That's because, for those of you that don't know, it's representing an element, a vector element that's both white and black. And now, since it's going to be a white outlined shape in the back, I'm going to go ahead and make the center just by default white. Of course, you're not seeing it's all the way in the back. And then I'm going to go ahead and pick this and give it a white stroke. You'll see where it's already starting to show up there. I'm going to go ahead and round off these things, bring this up so you guys can see this a little bit better. And you'll start to see where it's growing a bit. I'm going to go ahead and do about a 5 point. So now you really see the difference there. And I'm going to go ahead and hit Object, Expand, the fill and the stroke. And that's going to blow that out. And then I'm going to go ahead and merge that into one shape. So that's the shape behind this one. And then I'm going to go ahead and, I didn't lock anything down. I'm going to go ahead and group that together. So now that moves no matter what together. I'm going to go ahead and close that off. And I'm going to hit save again. We are at 50 minutes, if you can believe that. Okay? 50 minutes. So, let me see here. I guess I'll go ahead and keep going. Hopefully this recording keeps going. I'm always nervous running this long on these things because I'm never really sure how this is going to go. All right. I should have way more trust in my machine. I do, but at the same time, I'm like, I've had really wonky things happen before too, where then I end up losing most of my recording. Okay, we're going to go ahead and turn fighter on, and I'm going to go ahead and turn these on. So I know basically where these things are going to go and what the pattern is going to look like. Again, anything that is white is going to be the natural uncut slate. Anything that's black is going to be what is burned. And I know I keep saying that because I have to keep reminding myself of the whole thing when I'm going through this. So I'm going to go ahead and take the sword, which I grouped together. And now I'm going to go ahead and decide which way do I want him to be. So he kind of fits right there pretty well. I like that. You know, now I've lost the really wonderful crossguard and everything back behind it because he's behind the shield. But I'm going to go ahead and lock him down for now. And then I'm going to come in here to the shield. And since everything else is locked down, I can save. I do that only because these other layers, the one that says fighter and then the corners are all locked down. And I can always make the corners smaller, but I really want the presence of that in there. And maybe bring it down a bit so that we can really enjoy the pommel up here, which may end up leading me to having to do something else, like so I can really show off the stuff up here. You know what I mean? So if I drop that down quite a bit, that may mean that I'm going to have to make a helm or something up here, depending on what I do with the axe. Maybe the axe is larger and it kind of comes back across this way and this sort of thing. I don't know. I haven't decided on that. So there's my basic placement. Now, since I know that this is what's on here, I'm going to go ahead and start taking the parts and turning them into shapes. I'm going to take that off. And since I'm going to leave, so that would mean that the edge would be white because it's black, so it'll be cut in, and then the center here is going to be dark, which means then that the center boss here would have to be black. Take the stroke off that. And then this one here, I'm going to actually reverse the stroke in that so that way you can see where that is there. And I'm actually going to leave that. In this case, I'm going to leave that as a stroke because it's just a little bit easier for me, but I'm going to move the stroke to the inside, like so. And all I did was just bring the stroke on the inside. You can make the stroke ride the center of the vector line that creates the shape, the outside of the vector line, or the inside. I can get it more into that on a different video. I'm not that concerned with it right now. Since the white is going to stay the slate color, and I want these things to be kind of shiny, I can leave it where there's a black line, and then there's the rivet on there. That isn't going to be a problem, and I think that's actually probably what I'm going to do for now. Now I'm going to have a little bit of fun with it. I'm going to go ahead and all of this stuff is still selectable like that on there. I'm going to go ahead and start drawing in without any kind of stroke on it. I'm going to go ahead and start drawing in just some random damage done to it. So all of this would be in black. So maybe it's had some slashes across here like this into the leather on there. And maybe there's one underneath here. Like so. You'll notice it's not showing up on there because it's pretty close to the... It's underneath the fighter term. So, do it like this. When I think fighter, I don't have a real idea in my head who I'm thinking of. I guess for a long time I always thought of who is it that comes to mind? Not Conan the Barbarian. Now, that's who I specifically think of when I think of a barbarian. I'm going to go ahead and put some wood grain in this thing. And when I do that, I always think to myself like, oh yeah, that's you know, the kind of person. Like, so if you guys are familiar with Masters of the Universe, usually characters like any one of those people I considered fighters, you know, like Man-at-Arms or Fisto, just kind of everyday people. But I guess fighters also could be people that have a natural ability at fighting. They get into barroom brawls, things like that. All right. So that looks good. I'll put one more on here just for a little excess detail. All right. That's looking really good. I like that. And, you know, it's weird, too, because there's a part of me that wants to go in here and kind of do some stuff like this, where I'm doing the wood grain, but I'm scared that's going to look way too busy. I just knocked that out of the place. So I think I'm just going to do a couple of, you know, maybe there's a stress crack coming off this. So I get really quiet when I'm drawing like this. And I always think to myself, I'm like, who in the heck would want to watch somebody doing this stuff online? Like this, That's always the biggest misgiving I have about this sort of thing. Is like, who would even be interested in this? Like, oh, this guy's drawing in vectors. But it's funny because I really like watching people play video games, and as long as they're entertaining, I can't stand people that for a long time they'll just be like this horrible, awkward silence every once in a while. You'll hear like a cough, like or something. It's just weird. Or there's like some random episode of Geraldo Rivera playing in the background. That to me really isn't entertaining. I keep hoping that if anyone later's watching this, they'll be like, oh, hey, at least he was lively and he could kind of tell a story or explain some stuff along the way. When I worked for the Nelson Atkins Art Museum here in Kansas City for a while. Security guard overnight, 4 nights a week. Was not a bad job. It really finally got to me, and I'm glad that some other freelance opportunities and stuff came up, and I was able to divert back into what I had gone to school for and what I'd always wanted to do, which is stuff like this. And because of that, I ended up in a circumstance where, I got to walk around in there and see some really cool things, like a lot of stuff in their collection that I was like, whoa, this is nuts. Like, just overall, like, really cool stuff. And I remember thinking to myself, like, there is not a lot of European armor in here. They have one room that they call, like, their armor room, and that was it. I'm not making fun. I just thought there'd be more interest in that sort of thing. Like, that would be something that would be really cool. And for some reason, that's just not a big priority. I don't know why. It's just not. And I always thought that was just strange. Maybe it's just, maybe there's something conducive about that with their collection. Because from what I understand, I think it's the people they have that they bring in. Some of them bring their personal collections that are on display. Some of them are the people that they have specialties in that particular type of art. And the Nelson Atkins is very much two-dimensional art. There is quite a sculpture garden, and it is growing. This isn't to knock them. I just noticed that there's a lot of things where my interest lies in a lot more of the Middle Ages, and they have some incredible pieces in there. Amazing ones. But I noticed that they just didn't seem to have a large appreciation for armor. And that could just be me being me and being very weird about things. Now, the reason I did this is because now I can kind of guess where the sword is going to be sitting and how the highlights are going to play. Again, everything in black is going to be a highlight in this case. So it would just right now be just a weird vector shape in the background. So what I'm going to do is finish out this vector shape. I'm going to come in here first, though, and I'm going to highlight all of this. I'm going to group this whole thing like super group. And the sword is locked down. So now what I'm going to do is, I really am a fan. This is such a dorky thing I do, but I am a huge fan of cloth ties on anything. And for some reason, that just really gets me. I think it's because, I don't know why. I don't know if it's just an inspiration from like Asian, Eastern Asian things I've seen on swords and weapons where there's a little bit of cloth on there. I don't know where this comes from. This is something that I've always really enjoyed. It's just, to me, it just looks cool. It always has. And that's a pretty easy way to tell I drew it. Oh, is there cloth hanging off that handle? Doesn't matter if it's a pistol. Doesn't matter what it is. I don't know, maybe I just have an obsession with scarves or something, and that's why I like that stuff. So now I'm going to come in here, and since I don't need the detail back here, originally I was going to highlight the whole sword, and it gives you a little bit more flexibility if in this case I were to build all the highlights and I could infinitely move this thing around. And if I have to, I'll go back and do it again, but in this case, I knew the shield and even the word fighter were going to be covering elements of the sword. So in this case, I simply have to build certain parts of it up, and it won't be that big of a deal. So I'm going to go in here, and in this case, since this is going to be white, this is the shadow. So the shadow would naturally be on the bottom part of whatever this form is. So now I'm going to go in here, and I'm literally going to make up stuff. Since the shield is sitting in front, but I'm going to have to move all this to the back. I'm going to be really careful about how I'm doing this sort of thing. So maybe what I'm doing is just putting this reflection on here. As such. It's white. And it's a dark reflection. Remember, the top is going to be its own thing. And then I'm going to come in here and so I still want that outline to be on there. I don't want it to totally go away. And again, this will become a lot more clear once you guys see it. I'm kind of trying to reflect the same contoured element down here. And I'm giving it a little bit of breathing room. That's why I'm not completely going over. And, you know, but then I look at this, I'm like, I don't like that much. That looks kind of bad. And I know that I could probably reflect this over on the other side, but I'm really going to. This reminds me the most of when I sketch. And I'm trying to get something to look right. And that's passable. Yeah, that looks good. All right, now I'm going to work on the wrappings up here. So there'll be a small bit of highlight here. Or shadow. I'm talking shadow, not highlight. So, oh, did you see what I did? That's how I got my screen the wrong calibration. I was picking the wrong swatch. And then I'm going to go in here. This is just shadowed area of fabric. I'm going to do the same thing over here. So now maybe there's an area in here where the shadow really dipped in quite a bit. I did take that. Okay, and there's that. Now, unlike the pommel, or like the pommel with its cutout area, I did that on purpose. I didn't have to do that. It just made it easier to work other elements in there if I needed to. And it's just also reminding myself that that's truly a hole in there. It does the exact same thing if I leave the white, and you'll see that here at the end. So then the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to actually use the pen tool in this case just to get this is a little bit of cheating, but I'm doing this on purpose so that I can get that shadowed element down there. All right, so it'll take me a little while to go ahead and do this next part. So what I'm going to do is show you guys exactly what I end up doing by bringing this into Photoshop. So while we're waiting for Photoshop to load, I'll go ahead. This always takes a little bit of my system. And honestly, with the 3 things running, I have no idea what it's going to do in my system. So fingers crossed. This is probably not the way most people work. And I keep saying that. I think I'm really self-conscious about like how my stuff works or what I'm doing to put it together. It's really weird. And I shouldn't be that way, but it's kind of how I feel about this stuff. So we're now just at over an hour. And then I promise at the end of this video, I will put the finished version of it for you guys to see before I upload this thing. So I have a file here. I'm going to go ahead and open. This is the Dungeon Master mockup. So let me close this one out. All right. So what I'm going to do now is, this is basically how all of my mockups are created. This is so that I can test to make sure that the concept is working. So then I go back in here and I unlock everything. I save it. And then I make sure I unlock all the stuff on here. There's 2 levels of unlocking, of course, I got going on. Now, here, I'm going to group that. Here. Group that. I'm going to group that together. And hit save. And I'm going to hit select all. Hitting copy. Then with any luck, I can go back here to Photoshop. And I'm going to paste it in on its own layer as a smart object. I do not add this to my library. It is a memory hog. I'm certain somebody else will argue with me on that, but that's what I do. When it comes in here, it's coming in as a smart object, so it's constrained to a square. I hit enter. And then I'm going to go ahead and rasterize this. Now, all I'm doing is coming back in here, and I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, Autobots, transform and roll out. That was such a horrible Peter Cullen. All right. And then I sort of line all this up. This is also just, this is just a photo I have of one of the slate pieces we work on. I want to have a general idea as to what it's going to look like. Again, this isn't finished. This is still missing like a helmet element and the big battle axe that I'm going to put in there. I'm going to hit return. Now, remember what I told you about the black area being what's etched. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here, and since this is a decent resolution, I've got my tolerance set to 35, I'm going in and I'm hitting the, I'm selecting a white area with my magic wand. And then I'm just going to go up here to select, and I'm going up to similar. It's going to select all the white everywhere on here. Then I'm literally going to just hit delete. Delete will knock out everything in here. I unselect. This is what's left. Now, since it's already angled at the right angle it needs to be at, I'm going in here to a previous one. I'm going to copy the layer style, and I'm going to apply the layer style on this one. And there is a preview of what this will look like. As you can see, there's the stone blocks there. There's a decision I have to make. Do I like it like that, or would I reverse it? Now, you see what I'm saying? As in this case, they look really good, but is it too much? Is it taking away from the word fighter? Is it something where maybe the cracks should be light and then the rocks should be dark and there's an outline around them? Probably so they don't pull so much of the attention to the edges. So that'll be something I refine. But this was something that I discovered that I had to do to be able to make sure that the designs I was doing for this technique, which this is simply a digital mock-up of what the glowforge looks like. But after having gotten some test samples and pieces from Ben, I was able to go, okay, I need to replicate this so I can be much more on spot with it. This is the sort of thing you have to do. This is the extra work nobody ever talks about when you're a graphic designer, to be able to put into something like this and go, here's what I'm doing, here's how long it took. Like this was, I'm now on an hour and 10 minutes of designing this from almost scratch. I had designed all the typography first for these classes, and then I have to go back in and still build out the rest of this. I'm building every element from my mind. I didn't reference anything right now. This is all stuff that I know in my head. Not everyone can do that. Some people have to go out and look for these things. I like to make up stuff like this because I've always drawn it. I can draw from memory. I'm a lover of history and of fantasy art and stuff, and there's similar tropes and things you can do over and over again. There's a part of me too that's like, okay, do the scratches on the shield need to be any bigger, or do I leave them like this? They can always be thickened up later. And the other thing I do is I provide Ben with a lot of the source. I actually provide him with all of the source files, so he doesn't just have a PSD document. He has the actual digital files, the vector files that he will use in glowforge, and he has his own technique and his own ways of working with it that I'm not familiar with. But the weight is everything. It will designate how much detail is going to come out on these things and what it's going to look like. And I'm pretty excited for something like this. But again, in this one, maybe it's a little bit too light where the bricks are, and I may end up inverting that. It depends. Part of that is because I know that the blade for the axe is going to be extremely light, and in a measure of contrast, it will not show up. Now you'll notice, like around fighter, that black border was the white border in the original design, and we can just flip over real quick here and I'll show you. There it is right there. That's that little bit around that whole element there. We go back over here, that's that dark element right there. And it's really wild how that works out, but that's what I've had to discover on how things line up on there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop it right here, but I'm going to go ahead and show you guys what the final version looks like right now. Okay, it's the next morning, so really it's just a few hours later. I probably went to sleep around 3 in the morning, and now I'm back in here. I've gotten my revisions back, and so the overall feel was that the word fighter wasn't really showing up as well. Maybe there should be a little bit more punch up with like the F and the R, working with sizing, and that maybe to remove the helmet from this layout. And I was like, these are all things I can absolutely agree with. With the My only chagrin is going to be that the blade of the axe and the sword will go away. So I'm going to try a couple things here, see if something works. But what I've done is, just to save time, because nobody wants to watch me work on typography, I went ahead and designed this new version of it here. And this is down here is the working version. But this is the new version I've created. And I rebuilt it and made it a complete vector and all that other stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and take this, and since this is now saved as version 2, I am going to move this over into there. So I'm going to go ahead and move this up to the right layer. What I'm doing is over here on the, and I keep pointing at the screen again. I'm like, I've got to get used to working this way, and really in taking the time to explain it. So over my layers panel, I moved fighter. That's why the rectangle around it turned blue. I moved it up to layer 1, which is my typography layer. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come over here, and I'm really weird about this. I'll delete this later. Well, actually, I can delete it now. It's saved in the other version, so I can get rid of that. I'm going to go ahead and come in here. This is grouped. That's why I'm able to do this. Let me go ahead and center this and zoom out a little bit. Now, just to get this centered pretty well, I'm going to go ahead and drag a guideline, the things I don't like to use that often. And I'm going to go ahead and center this the best I can. And, oh, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and remove the helmet out. I could have finessed it more to get the H to be more centered. This is pretty centered now. If I really had wanted to, I probably could have pushed it, maybe made the H a little wider, pushed it over, and I may still do that depending on how this looks. It doesn't look bad to me right now, but this is turning into a very centered sort of layout. So it's making me kind of think twice. It's like, well, maybe the H should have been along. You know, this is the weird thing that I run across in typography. I usually like to run with something and just go, bam, I'm going to hit it. I'm going to hit it hard. And, you know, just go with what the general, I hate to mess up what fonts look like. In this case, I really did go back in and re-edit this a lot. I added other things onto it, so there was probably no reason I couldn't have done that. What I was worried about, though, was widening the H out was going to start bringing more attention to it in the center, and it would break up how the word was going to form together whenever I applied any sort of warping onto the typography. And so I just went with this. Visually, it's looking not bad. I like that quite a bit better. So let me remove this ridiculous guide from here. Clear guides. Gonna make sure I'm recording. I have had bad dreams about talking for hours and nothing being recorded. So I'm gonna go ahead and lock down my typography layer. And I'm going to move the shield up. So let's see here. Now I don't know that the shield was centered. Maybe it was. Yeah, see, this is where I'm going to have a little bit of a problem, because if I move the shield up, I mean, that looks fine, but now fighter really looks a little off, doesn't it? It looks like the shield needs to be more this way, but part of that is because, how did this work? Also, what is happening there? Oh, look at that. Look at that. Okay, so some of the highlights on the sword were coming forward. That also means I need to, well, maybe not. Let me see here. That's all grouped, so I'm going to X, put it in the front, like so. Okay. So there's that. If I recenter this between the F and the R, it's not looking too bad. See, I don't want to lose the corners. The feedback I got was that the corners were really nice. Those looked great, and I really enjoy them. It brings kind of a, for my own personal love, a He-Man and Castle Grayskull kind of feel to it. But now, the really beautiful work of the sword and the axe are lost. So what happens if I were to take this, put it in the back? Oh, that's not terrible. Oh, look at that. I put the axe on the corner elements. Why are you down there, Mr. Axe? You need to be up here. I'm going to move this up to second layer, which I haven't renamed. I'm going to name that the weapons layer. Think about this, man. I know it's the small things, but I have a job where I can name things like weapons layer, dragon's teeth, robot's head. It's the small dorky things that add up and make this stuff really worthwhile. All right. So that's a little bit better. I kind of like that. See, but there's so much extra space now that I almost, like, it's ridiculous, but I almost want to increase the size of the shield. Like this. Which is almost overpowering, though, isn't it? Right? It's almost too much. In fact, it is too much. Let me reduce that down. Back one step. Bring it down. I guess my big lament is that so much of it will be lost in translation. It just doesn't, like, the details go away. Part of that, though, is because of where fighter is. So now it comes down to just messing with the elements, because I tend to like where I can kind of splay out and lay things down. Now, the good thing about this is I have a second monitor. My monitor setup is pretty bizarre. I always have my Cintiq down here on the bottom, and then up on top, I have a larger, wider, widescreen monitor. This is an older Cintiq, that Wacom tablet that I got off of my buddy Ryan. And it works great, but it's got more of a, it's not exactly a 3:4 aspect ratio, but it's pretty close, which is why this particular layout here in OBS works. Normally, what you're seeing down below here with like the additional artwork of the stuff that I have down there, that would normally be completely widened out if I was recording the top screen. But in this case, I leave it up on top because it's reduced down about 50%, and I can look at it. And from looking at that, right now I'm too close to this artwork. So here's also another little tip. If you're working on traditional or digital stuff, I highly recommend this. Take a picture with your phone. Doesn't have to be anything that you're going to post or anything else like that. Take it for your own reference, walk away from it a bit, and take a look at it. When you see something shrunk down, that's when the details really start to show themselves as to if something's off balance. In this case, this is looking extremely busy. And I can tell from looking at the top screen, like this would be a complete mess bringing it over. I don't want to lose I really don't want to lose the beautiful stuff that I have in there going with the sword and the axe. That definitely needs to be in there. But does it become something else? And that's what I'm arguing with myself now, is like, well, what is the next evolution of this? So I'm going to shut up and try some things here. So what I'm going to do, I mean, the good thing is I can group a lot of these things for now. Now, well, here's where things are really going to get weird. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my typography layer. I'm going to lock my back corner layers. I'm going to save everything, or everything goes to hell in a handbasket here. Now, the axe has been completely, that is all grouped, pretty sure. Yeah. So I'm going to move the axe over here. And this is one of the reasons why I usually will go back in and do all the shading I need to do on this, because it's for moments exactly like this when I start taking apart a design to rework it, that I have to question how I'm going to put things together. So, you know, my natural reaction is to go, okay, well, I like a sword doing this, you know, kind of up and down. And again, this is another zone where if you want to drag in a guide, which is always a good thing, I guess, to, you know, straighten this out. Kind of there's probably some really good designer tips on this, and I always struggle to get things back on point because of where I put them, but I am glad now that programs are getting better about helping me straighten out my stuff. There we go. All right, so let's say we're going to leave the sword here like that. Go back to my ergonomic mouse. I'm going to tell you guys right now, it took about 2 months, but just like it did with Adobe Premiere, I was able to go right back in and do some pretty good stuff with it. Hey, Luna. Luna, you are totally in the way. Yeah, thanks for that. Please don't jump in the window. Hold on, we're going to have a commercial break here while what are you doing? What are you doing? Yes? Yes, I know. Smush, smush. I can't get to the Cintiq. Can you move over here? You have a whole bed on the side. I think I've told you guys this before in other videos, but I used to have a cutting board that I had custom designed, slid out on top. It was very cool. I'll do a video on it sometime. And that's now unofficially her bed. Well, at least until she gets bored of it again. Okay, so now we'll center the shield. So that's looking pretty good. But what I'm going to do is do this so that way we can see the rivets a little better. There, okay, and it's still got, you know, a little bit of an off-center sort of feel with the wood grain planks on it. Go ahead and hit save there. Now, so I'm not making this so busy. See, there's a part of me that really wants to do that with it. Like, I think that's really, really freaking cool. And if it was just this and there was no text, it'd be double axes all the way. But that's not what we're doing here. So, you can see, watch. Let me take this out here for a second. And so, really, I want to test this with the typography first. That's already looking a lot better. Let me lock this down. Let me move my typography down some. I've also put, as you can see on there, a white edge around the whole thing, so it looks a little bit better. I'm gonna drop this down. God, now I'm really wishing that I'm almost thinking I'm gonna have to go back and rebuild this damn thing just to get the H in the center, because here's natural center. And although that doesn't look, it's not terrible. I guess what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wait until I get everything put together and then go from there, because right now I'm certainly panicking about it. I'm like, oh, this needs to look right. Let me see here. That's actually not looking too bad. Now, what happens if I lock this down, go back to my weapons layer, and maybe the axe there now is going to the back. Okay, this might be working here. So then we're going to go ahead and take this and we're going to double that up. So we'll go ahead and reflect that one. Okay, first, now this is a weird bug I've seen where sometimes it doesn't want to copy, even though I've done the command on my keyboard. And I'm beginning to wonder if that's not because my keyboard is finally giving out, which is always a bum deal. All right, that I'm liking a lot more. It's actually growing on me too, this off-center H, just a little bit. I'm really liking that a lot more. That seems far more unified than the other version I had. Seems like it's going to read better. So now here's the ultimate test. Again, we're looking at this from an inverted status. Normally, this is exactly what you would get, like I've stated before. If you were going to burn this on wood or leather, anything else, any other substrate, this is normally what you'd get. But if you get a darker substrate that has a lighter underbelly on it, I've actually seen the exact same thing happen, like on gaming consoles. There was a company for a long time that was like customizing Nintendo DS's and small handheld systems, PSPs, whatever, or even the larger consoles. But because the plastic, depending on what would happen, most plastic would be a coating of paint over it, and then it would burn to go to the lighter undercoating, or the lighter material, which is the ABS plastic underneath, that would be a white color. So what we're going to do now is, I have Photoshop open, so I'm going to go ahead and unlock everything here. And make sure everything's unlocked first. Yeah, everything is unlocked. I'm going to go ahead and hit all, and hit copy. We're going to bring this in here. And if this is the old version of it, okay? You close that out. And then we're going to go ahead and hit paste smart object. We are not adding it to the library, and I brought in too much crap with it. I just realized those things are on there. So what we're going to do is get rid of that. I don't want to do that. I'm going to go back here. And now, since I'm pretty happy with this, I'm going to go ahead and delete these, since I don't really need these here. And what I'm doing is accidentally just selecting everything, and probably don't have to do that, but I used to work with an individual years ago that, man, it didn't matter what you did. Their Illustrator files, they worked with the pen tool, and like, there was just these little dots everywhere. Like when you got in there, it was maddening. And I know that when I hand this off to Ben, or any client, anytime I do design work for anybody, my Illustrator files, I really try and make sure that they're on point and they're really, really clean. I don't want anything else showing up in there, nothing weird or anything else like that. Go ahead and hit save. And what I'm doing here, I'm going to go ahead and select the white. I've rasterized the image, so it's no longer a smart object. And now that I've done that, I'm going to go up here to select similar. That's going to select all the white in there. Going to delete it out. Then I'm going to deselect it. And I'm going to go ahead and go to transform and distort. Again, this isn't anything that has to be 100%. And this, I probably should have gotten a piece that was sort of head on, but this was the photo I really liked, so I thought it looked a little bit better, a little more dynamic. I used to love making mock-ups for a lot of my clients, and as time went on, they were like, "No, I don't want to see the mock-up. I want to see, I just want to see the files. Send them to me, make sure they're correct." I'm like, "Okay, but you're probably better off seeing it this way." All right, so here's the moment of truth. Let's see here. Paste layer style. I really like that. I think that came out really freaking nice. I actually like that quite a bit. And now I don't have a problem with the H not being centered, but I know that, this is client work. So ultimately, if Ben asks me to, I will probably go back in there and realign the H so it's more toward the center. But the reason was, when I was looking at it, I thought, you know what, I kind of like that, because that H, granted, this is from a skewed aspect, but if we go back and we look over here at the vector, I'm not making this up. This is truly what I looked at. If you look at just the median guideline there, what lines up with it? That H part lines up with the other lit up part of the blade down below, and it actually follows through. Like, that's the highlight on that part of the blade. Now, going back and looking at it, it looks fine. There's no issue there or anything else like that. What I will probably end up doing as one final thing is going back in and just checking all of my shapes. I'm looking at this now. I'm like, you know what? There's no reason for that dark part of the blade to drop off so weirdly with an angle like that. And if I really want it to look like it's continuing through with the H, I'm going to bring that up back in the vector. So it would be this shape right here that I'm looking at. I'm going to succinctly highlight that one. In fact, I can go ahead and do that now. That's why I have you guys on this, so you guys can watch this sort of thing. All right, so I'm going to bring this up. And what my plan is I'm actually going to leave it kind of at an odd angle like this, and take a look at it first and say, oh, okay, I'm kind of, so that way it looks like Fighter is really, really floating above this. And so I thought, well, that doesn't look too bad. But then maybe I really am going in here, and I'll push that up like that. No, looks better like that. It conforms to what the shape of the H would be. If it's angled a certain way, that shadow is going to reflect it a certain way as well too. I don't need to be reinventing physics or the physical world in this respect. So now with that, I'm going to go ahead and hit, I'm going to save that again. I'm going to hit all, and oh, I locked my layer. See, that's where I run into the danger there. So I'm going to hit save again. All, copy, and then I'm going to get rid of this one. I have all the rest of the layers in this sucker, and I'm trying to not switch to Illustrator. Let me go ahead and paste that. Now, the reason I'm enlarging it is so that way it probably doesn't make that big of a difference, but this particular document is set up at 72 dpi, so it's really just meant for a digital mock-up. It's not meant for anything else aside from that. And because of that, I can work pretty quickly on it. It's not memory intensive. It's not bad for that. All right, delete that out, deselect, and go to transform and distort. And then I'm going to go in here and move everything over again. For those of you that are watching that do have design backgrounds or anything else like that, again, I apologize if I'm doing anything just lunk-headed in how I'm working my designs. I am using way more keyboard shortcuts than I ever have. There are still some things that I'm very comfortable using the menu with. I know I got into a lot of trouble working at Hallmark for that. Not officially, but my buddies always gave me crap over that. So paste Yeah, see, I'm already liking that a lot better. Okay, so that was the one thing. And so this is the reason why I'll continually test any of my layouts like this, because I want to see what it ultimately ends up looking like in the end. And this really came out nice. Now, am I lamenting the loss of the detail of the shield boss in the center? Yeah. Am I lamenting the fact that you can't see the rest of the cool stuff on the axe? Yes. Should I probably also put another shape around the shield to differentiate it? One more line to delineate it, to push the axe back in the background? Maybe, but I also know that that's going to start crashing into the top part of where fighter is. And I don't know if maybe that's just becoming more designy as it pushes back and fighter is pulling forward more like it is here. And I'm more comfortable with that because it's giving it sort of a, even though it's really not there, your eye, at least mine, from how I'm inferring upon it, is seeing fighters floating a little bit above it, like it's almost like a drop shadow. And if I'm connecting around the top part of the shield to delineate it from the axe in the back, it becomes less design and becomes, well, now it's starting to go into the zone of less abstraction and more reality. And in this case, I'm trying to abstract the back a little bit more. This has been the most interesting part about working on these sort of files, because they mimic engraving to a large degree, or any one of those, anything like that, intaglio, that sort of stuff, and mimics it a lot. And this has been a lot of fun. So hopefully you guys learned something along the way. If you have any questions, reach out to me at Mario at I really haven't had that much rest. Mario at mariomora.net, which is my email. Or you can find me on social media. I am on almost every platform that I can think of. I am on Facebook. I am on Instagram. I am on Etsy. I have my own website, which is theartisanrogue.com. And you can message me on any one of those things. And, or you can leave a comment down below here on YouTube. Thanks again for watching. I sincerely appreciate it. I really hope you guys learned something. And if you have any other questions or anything else like that, like I said, just reach out. I have fielded questions before. That's something I miss from having done comic shows. I used to talk to people and review portfolios. I mean, I'm no big name, but I love giving feedback and trying to help people along, because when I was starting out, that was something I always wanted. Now, I'm going to go ahead and end this before I hit an hour and a half. I'm pretty sure I've already hit that. I'm at 23 minutes. I'm going to send this new layout to see if it gets approved. Wish me luck, guys. Talk to you then. And then what I'm going to do is, when I build my weaponry and stuff like that, again, this is, you got, I was choking there for a second. I got no water down here. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to, now, because of the nature of how the text was and how I was able to warp it, I probably could have fidgeted it. Is that fidgeted? Man, I've got to work on my diction. I could have